Yeah. Good. What does the Leica Summilux 50 f1, the Leica Summilux 90 f2 Pre-ASPH and today's lens all have in common? They are all Walter Mandela lenses, and that's a good thing. The bokeh is just amazing, and I feel slightly cheated that somebody hadn't told me about this lens before. Today we're talking about the Leica Summilux 50mm f1.4 version 2 or E43. This video will tell you hopefully everything you need to know about the lens, lots of sample photos, and why it should probably be on your radar for lenses to check out in the future. Hey guys, Matt here from MrLeica.com. So thanks to one of my students, I got to test this awesome lens. Last weekend I was in London teaching a model photography workshop with one of my patrons, Richard, who flew in from Chicago. In the morning I was helping him get the most from his Leica M11 rangefinder camera. Then in the afternoon I arranged a model shoot for us. For the model session, Rich, like many of my other photographers, decided to swap to an SL series camera because they're just faster when you want to concentrate on taking the picture rather than worrying about your gear. So in the afternoon, Rich was using his SL2 and the Leica Summilux 50 f2 Apo SL lens. Very nice lens and very nice if you want autofocus for a fast setup for using, for say, portraits in this example. The benefit of that was Rich kindly let me use his vintage Summilux lens, and so that's the basis of today's video. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel or you follow my MrLeica.com blog, you'll know that I own the spherical version of the Leica Summilux lens. So my first impressions of seeing the vintage version is, oh my god, it's a lot smaller than the lens I have, and second, the bokeh is so much better. I was blown away, and it's always a good sign of a good lens when you put the lens on your camera at the start of the shoot and you've left the same lens on the camera for the entire shoot. If you know anything about me, you know that I love swapping lenses and testing different gear, so to use the same lens for an entire shoot, that shows that it's a really, really good lens. So with that said, first impressions, smaller than the spherical and much, much nicer bokeh. It's not all good news. The vintage version of the lens only focuses as close as 1 meter, where the new lens focuses as close as 0.7 meters, and the old lens does suffer a bit more from flare than the lens that I have. To whet your appetite, here are a few photos of Rich during the workshop, shot with the vintage Summilux lens on my Leica SL camera. All photos you'll see in this video are shot on my Leica SL, as that's the camera that I was using on the day. Okay, so what do you need to know about this amazing lens? This lens was in production from 1961, and it's the same optical formula right through into 2004 when the spherical version was released. We're talking about the version 2, but there is also a version 3. The version 3 has the same optical formula as the version 2, but the benefit of focusing to 0.7 meters and a built-in lens hood. The optical formula of the version 2 Summilux is 7 elements in 5 groups. It's single coated and it's got 12 aperture blades. That's really nice when it comes to bokeh. The version 2 Summilux has a maximum aperture of 1.4 going down to f16 with half-stop aperture clicks, and it's got a longer focus throw than the modern spherical version of the Summilux. This is great if you want precision focusing, but it's not so good if you're trying to focus quickly in one movement from minimum focus distance through to infinity. The filter size of the version 2 Summilux is 43mm compared to 46mm for the version 3 and the spherical version. You do have to be a bit careful with filters because it's got a 0.5 older style pitch, like a coarser pitch when you screw in the filter, which means modern filters don't quite screw in as smoothly as they should because modern filters are a 0.75 pitch. So ideally try and find an old filter or just screw in a modern filter much more carefully so not to strip the filter threads. As mentioned, I was using the lens on the Leica SL camera, but if you're using it on a mirrorless camera, the lens without the lens hood has pretty much zero viewfinder blockage. With the lens hood attached, you do get some blockage. If you've seen some of my very old videos, I used to own the Leica Summilux version 5 50 f2, and size-wise it's pretty much identical to the version 5 Summilux. If you're aware of that lens, that means it's pretty small and a nice size, especially for M-mount cameras. One important thing to note about this lens, it is a Walter Mandela designed lens, and that normally means amazing photos and very, very nice rendering. Most of my favourite Leica lenses are Mandela design lenses, such as I say the Summilux 50 f1, the 90 f2 Pre-ASPH. There are many, but they're all very, very nice. So with that, how good are the photos from the version 2 Summilux? Before we look at example photos from the workshop itself, here are some photos that give you an idea of the lens characteristics. Firstly, vignetting. Shot at 1.4, there's quite heavy vignetting, but as you stop down, the vignetting will reduce, and by f4, it's pretty much gone. Lens flare. The lens flare is not as bad as some vintage lenses, i.e. the Light Lens Lab replica of the 50 f2 Elcan. That flares terribly in terms of the whole photo pretty much whites out. It's not as bad as that, but it's not as good as the spherical Summilux. When I say not bad, you'll get some veiling flare, i.e. loss of contrast, and you'll see that in some of the model photos, and you will get some flare patterns when shooting directly at the sun. Definitely not terrible, and it wouldn't stop me from buying this lens. Being a vintage lens, the sun stars are not amazing, but you can get sun stars if you shoot in the right conditions and stop the lens down, as seen here. And what about colours? The colours from this lens I would say are natural, not overly saturated, with a slight cool tone, with an emphasis on the blues and greens. Strangely, I found the photos from the model shoot, many of them nicer in colour than my usual black and white conversion with my presets, and that suggests that the lens is nice when it comes to colours. Okay, sharpness. As you know, this is important to me. I'm not a pixel peeper, but I do like a lens to be sharp enough in the centre for my portraits. This lens doesn't disappoint. Being a fast vintage lens, and because of the lens distortion, similar to its sibling, the 75 1.4 Summilux that I reviewed recently, which is also a Mandala design, you get great sharpness in the centre, shot wide open, but as soon as you get away to the mid area and then at the edges, the sharpness just falls off straight away. This is obviously amazing for portraits if you center your subject in the middle of the photo, and gives really, really beautiful rendering. If you want sharp edges, you will need to stop down to around f8 to get the corner sharp, because there's so much curvature in the lens. Contrast. As with many fast lenses, the contrast improves when you stop down to f2, f2.8. Wide open, the contrast is lower, but this will also depend on the lights that you're shooting in. If you're shooting towards a bright subject, you will get, as I say, that veiling flare and lower contrast because of the lens coating. Being a 1960s design lens, you will get a bit of that Leica glow magic on the highlights when shot wide open at 1.4. That will disappear when you stop the lens down. Finally, bokeh. This is a big one for me, especially on this particular lens, because the bokeh is just absolutely magical. Right in the base centre, you'll have circular bokeh, but pretty much anything from just outside the centre, you'll start to see oval or cat-eye bokeh in a bit of a circular swirling pattern because of the lens curvature. For me, this is just absolutely magic when it comes to portraits, and I much prefer cat-eye bokeh coming really into the middle of the frame to get those really beautiful, dreamy looking portraits. And that's what really caught my eye when I first tested this lens, when Richard said, would I like to test it? So what is the verdict? Will I be buying this lens? Before I do, I want to say a huge thanks again to Richard for making this video possible, and as always, a huge thanks to my awesome patrons for making this whole channel possible. So the verdict is, I'd be really rubbish at poker. I really like this lens. I would go as far to say, for digital work, I would prefer this lens over the spherical version that I own, and it is cheaper than the spherical version. However, if you prefer a more perfect look, and say you want to do client work, or if you want to use a lens on film with a more perfect look, then I think the spherical version is better. The drawbacks of the vintage version 2 lens is the 1 meter close focus distance. If you're using it on an M camera, if you're using it on an SL camera, you can just use a close focus adapter, so that's not really a problem. Some people won't like the longer focus throw, and the slight veiling flare also is probably a negative compared to the more corrected spherical version. In terms of pros, bokeh is absolutely amazing, and I love the rendering. I think this is a brilliant portrait lens. I love the fact that it's smaller than the spherical version because it balances much nicer on M cameras. I found the spherical version I own very front heavy, and for that reason I've always seeked out alternative smaller 50mm lenses. Talking of alternative lenses, obviously being a vintage fast Leica lens, the version 2 spherical is not a cheap lens. You're going to pay over probably £2,000. I can put some links to eBay below. You can check out the latest prices. It's cheaper than a spherical, but you can get much cheaper lenses if you don't want a Leica branded lens. So what are my top 3 alternatives? I'd say in no particular order. You could try the Zeiss Sonar 50 1.5. That's got a minimum focus distance of 0.9 meters instead of 1 meter. It's got arguably as nice bokeh, but it does suffer from focus shift. So that's one lens I owned and sold, and I do actually regret selling it, especially now I use the SL camera more. It is a very, very nice lens. Option number 2, you could get the vintage Voigtlander Nocturne 50 1.5 spherical LTM lens. This is another lens that I own, and I prefer the rendering of the LTM version to the modern VM lens, the version 2. So you could check that out. And number 3, one of my favourite lenses is the Nikkor SC 50 1.4. That lens is absolutely fantastic. I'd say it's slightly soft at 1.4 than the Summilux, but it's probably on a par in terms of a very nice bokeh and rendering. To see more on the Nikkor SC 51.4, watch this video next.